Hello, I'm Jessamy Carlson and I'm the Principal Record Specialist for Family, Local and Community History here at the National Archives.
And I'm Brian Gurrin. I'm the Census Specialist on the Virtual Record Treasury of Ireland project.
And we are here today to talk a little bit about tracing Irish heritage, starting with records from Britain and then moving back to the variety of material that's available through the virtual repository. So one of the ways I know that people quite often find that they have Irish heritage, if they didn't know already, is they find it in the census, because in England and Wales and also in Scotland, the censuses start to record where people are born by name from the 1851 census onwards all the way through to the 1921, which is our most recent census. And quite often you'll find that in Ireland is listed. So between 1851 and 1891, you only get the country, so just Ireland. But from then onwards, you start to get towns, and that allows people to trace their roots back. And sometimes you get evidence of that movement from Ireland to England. So there's an example I'm quite fond of in Liverpool, where you have a family called the Shillardays who move in 1841. And we know that because the older two children are born in Ireland and the parents are listed as having been born in Ireland. And then their middle child, who's called Hercules, which is a cracking name, is born at sea. And then the younger two children are born in Liverpool. So we can see the transition of that family from England to Ireland through the places they are born that are listed. But unfortunately, all the family who are born in Ireland die before the census starts to tell us where in Ireland they're from. So we're kind of a little bit stuck on working out the roots. Although fortunately with this example, it's such an unusual surname that we can track them down through the mapping of Irish surnames that they're almost certainly from either County Armagh or County Down. And I've talked fairly extensively in previous webinars about the census and how that works for England and Wales. But in Ireland, it's not quite the same picture.
No, it's not. It's a little bit more difficult in Ireland. In Ireland, the census was recording the names of people from 1821, and the censuses from 1821, 1831, 1841 and 1851 were in the Public Record Office, and the Public Record Office then was destroyed in 1922. So a lot of the census material was destroyed. So it would be very unlikely that we'd be able to trace the Shillardays through Irish census records. However, we have been working in the Virtual Treasury project on trying to recover census material. Now, not everything was destroyed. There are some original material surviving, small amounts. There are 4 volumes for 1821, some 1841 and 1851 volumes surviving as well. But also, when the census material was available in the Public Record Office, genealogists and record agents and such came in and extracted information from the census. So when the census records were destroyed in 1922, the records that the genealogists and the record agents had made suddenly became very important. Many of those were submitted to archives. There are many sets of records up in the Public Record Office of Northern Ireland and the National Archives in Ireland and the National Library and so on. And on the Record Treasury project, we've been going into those archives and going through the records of the genealogists that are available and trying to extract census information. And we've had quite a lot of success with that now. So we're building up a good collection of census material which survived in transcripts, and we're making that available on the Virtual Record Treasury website through an element called Census Gleanings, or Gleanings from the Censuses of Ireland.
That's coming fairly soon. Am I right in recalling that?
It's being built up as we go along, so we're adding to it all the time. We have many thousands of names that we've identified in these various collections. These are in collections that are available to the public, but they were never thoroughly catalogued. So the census information was always available, but it was never really readily identifiable. But by going through it page by page, we've been able to identify the material and then make it available. And we're adding to it all the time. So we have many thousands of names identified. We have many thousands of names available in the census gleanings element. And we're adding to it every week.
And that's such a brilliant resource for Irish social history. And I know in England and Wales, the most recently released census for us is the 1921, and that went ahead for England and Wales and Scotland. But in Ireland, it didn't happen, right?
Different matter in Ireland. Again, it was planned that a census would be held in Ireland in 1921. But at the time, the War of Independence was on, and it became impossible to organise the census. So in April 1921, the census was formally cancelled. And the censuses in Ireland, in the Northern Ireland and in the Free State, or the 26 counties in the south of Ireland, were put off until 1926. The 1926 census for Northern Ireland was destroyed during World War II, but the 1926 census for Southern Ireland survived. They're held by the National Archives Ireland, and they're going to be released in 2026 next year.
So in England and Wales, the census only holds personal information from 1841 onwards, but it's a different picture in Ireland. And you've already touched on the 1821 census, but are there any earlier examples?
There are indeed. There was a remarkable census that was conducted in Ireland in 1766, a religious census which required the return of all household names. That can be very useful for genealogists. And there are interesting local censuses around for a small number of places, such as the 1799 census at Carrick-on-Suir, the 1820s census for Lisburn, and other interesting items which are very, very useful for genealogists and family historians if you're interested in those particular places.
And I know in some of the local records that are held over in England and Wales, there's also a couple of examples of religious censuses. So I know in the 1890s, there's a census of the Catholic population in the Diocese of Westminster, which is pretty much the whole of London. And there's quite a sizable Irish population in London at that point. So that's another example of an interesting one that you might not realise survives, but there's actually there. That's held by Westminster Archives, but it's available through commercial partners, and you can look at that. So there are gleanings of other social stories we can tell through different aspects of a census, I guess.
Absolutely. And that's a superb census, very, very detailed. So that's an excellent source.
There will be a list at the end of this recording which cites all the sources we've talked about this, but where can you access the census?
If you want to access that material, we're making it available through the Virtual Treasury. So access the Virtual Treasury website, then access census gleanings, and in there you can browse through the various censuses. They're presented by date, and then they're presented by geographical hierarchy. They're very easy to use, and the geographical hierarchy is generally understood by family historians, so it's quite accessible. And the information is available in tabular format, and it can be copied out and examined and so on.
So civil registration in England and Wales starts in September 1837, and that covers births, marriages and deaths. Any marriage which is not taking place in a Church of England church in England and Wales has to be registered with the local register office, and they have to give notice of those marriages in the way that banns would be called in the Church of England. But that's not the case in Ireland. Civil registration works quite differently, and there's different time frames at play in Ireland, right?
Different time frames indeed. Civil registration commenced in Ireland in 1845. In 1845, all Church of Ireland established church marriages had to be registered. So that was the introduction to civil registration in Ireland. But general civil registration didn't come in until 1864. And under that, births were registered, deaths were registered, and all marriages, so Catholic marriages came in. So if you're using civil registration, Catholic marriages won't appear before 1864, and no births will appear before 1864. And curiously, that's one of the reasons why the Irish census form was a little bit more complicated than the one in England, because since England had civil registration, there was no need to require the recording of deaths on the English or the Welsh census form. But in Ireland, with no civil registration of deaths, the early census forms that were used had a table which required the recording of deaths on them, deaths that had happened in the previous 10 years. Civil registration, Irish civil registration, is freely available on a website, irishgenealogy.ie. It's searchable, and it's a very, very useful and very, very convenient site for the family historian or the genealogist.
And if you're looking for England and Wales, there's a great website called freebmd.org.uk, which has a similar function. You can search all those civil registration indexes. from 1837 up to the moment to sort of the 1970s or thereabouts. And it's quite useful for wildcard searching for where you have different ways that surnames are spelt, or you might have misspellings or common misspellings. You can kind of utilise the functionality before going to the General Register Office's own sites. You could sort of use the two sets together to get the best out of the possible data.
Very good. Civil registration, I should say, there's a 100-year rule on it for births and marriages, so you can't access anything within the last 100 years, and for 50 years for deaths. So that's that.
Whereas in England and Wales, you can access up to 2 years ago or thereabouts. Because the certificates themselves aren't in the public domain that way, it's just the indexes. So you can get far more recent records through the English and Welsh system. Scotland has its own functionality, which is separately administered, and I'll leave those to the Scottish specialists. But yeah, it's interesting to hear about the variety of sources that you might find to be trying to trace those records through a government lens, I guess.
Yeah. Now, when I talk about those limitations, those are the limitations that are available online. You can go into the General Registry Office and access more recent material, but online, it's within those timeframes.
So once you've found records in the civil indexes, be that in Ireland or in England and Wales, one of the options that you might wish to pursue is the religious records that survive. There's a mix of Catholic and Protestant records for both Ireland and England and Wales. Obviously, in England and Wales, the state religion is the Church of England, or the Church in Wales, latterly in the 20th century. And all marriages which take place in anywhere that is not the Church of England have to be registered through the civil indexes. Church records are slightly different, but you do get a mix of registers that survive for England and Wales. And you might also find social records, so records around church societies, those kind of things sort of turn up. There's a whole mix of things, and that can be an interesting way sometimes of tracing kind of family movements and family patterns as they're making their lives. It's also with marriage records, for example. For Protestant records, you would get the witnesses listed for the marriage, and for Catholic records, sometimes for things like baptism, you'll get the godparents listed, but those vary slightly. And there's a mix of record sources surviving for Ireland as well, am I right?
Yes. Here again, the destruction of the Public Record Office comes into play here, because the Church of Ireland was the official state church in Ireland, the established church. And that was up until the passage of the Irish Church Act in 1869, and it was disestablished by that, so it became a private church. But because the records were official state records, they were taken into the Public Record Office. So many hundreds of Church of Ireland records arrived in the Public Record Office, and then when the Record Office was destroyed, the parish registers were destroyed. Now there are many copies, and the survival rate is much better than you might assume, but a lot of information was lost. The Catholic Church, which was just a private church, didn't have any official state function. Those were private records, so they didn't go into the Public Record Office. So many Catholic parish registers have survived. Now, the National Library of Ireland has a wonderful website which has made the Catholic parish registers available online. You can view images of the parish registers. They're not searchable, so it can be difficult to use them. You do have to scroll through the images to find your information. But if you have identified an ancestor in the civil registration, you know the date of birth of that ancestor, for instance. So it should be a simple task then, if the Catholic Register exists, to access the Catholic Register and identify that particular person. And by combining the information in the civil registration and the information in the Catholic Register, you can get quite a lot of information about your ancestor. And as you said, Catholic registers for a baptism, they'll typically contain the name of godparents. They'll often contain the information on the address or the location that the person lived in. So they're very useful for our family history. Catholic marriage registers will contain information about the witnesses to the marriage, and also often the occupation of the family, the names of the parents sometimes. And one of the main differences between Catholic registers and Church of Ireland registers is that the Church of Ireland parishes typically recorded burials. So burial records were available for Church of Ireland. Catholic parishes usually didn't record burials. So you will typically only have baptism and marriage registers for Catholic parishes. Some parishes will have recorded burials or funerals, but that was untypical.
So I know with the research that I've done in Liverpool, there are quite a lot of Latin parishes in Liverpool, which means that the parish registers for the Catholic churches are written in Latin. So that can be a bit of a stumbling block if you're not familiar with it. Is that true in Irish records as well?
That's less true in Irish Catholic records. Most Catholic records are written in English, although the first name is often Latinized.
And in terms of Gaelic, does that come up a lot? Because I know when I was starting to look for examples of trying to trace Irish names or names that I associate with Ireland, the names I was looking for, like Niamh and Fionnuala and those kind of names, just weren't coming up. And I understand that there's a good historical reason for that, which shows my lack of research in Ireland, I guess. So can you talk us through about that change of naming and kind of naming practices in Ireland in the 19th century?
Yes, those names were uncommon in Ireland in the 19th century. Generally, names were English names like John and Patrick and William and James, names that we view as typically Irish now. They only became more popular at the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century when the Gaelic revival started to pick up steam in Ireland. So those names were not typically used in the 19th century.
Which is fascinating.
Yeah.
So we do hold some military records for Ireland in our collections here at Kew. Prior to 1921, Irish men and women who are serving in military services are going to be in records that are held here at Kew. But after 1921, it's a little bit different.
Yeah, there's a superb website called militaryarchives.ie, which has many, many military records available, including a census of the Irish Army in November 1922. It's very, very good, very easy to use, freely available. Indeed, I found my own grandfather.
Brilliant. But if you are looking for Irish records for military service prior to 1921, then you will need to come to the National Archives here in London and look at the records that we hold here. And there's quite a lot of material that's available through those resources, and you can find out more about that through the research guides on our website. And I guess there are other places in our collections here that you might look if you've found that you have Irish ancestors who've moved to the UK and who have worked. So there's sort of nursing records is a really key one. We know that there's lots of Irish nurses who nurse in England and Wales, so some of the resources like the Royal College of Nursing's records might well allow you to trace Irish nurses through the 20th century, not least because the annual lists of registered nurses for the UK and Ireland include the hospital a woman has trained in and also where she's working now. So that can be a nice way of tracing women through time through the sources that are held. Again, you can access those through the Royal College of Nursing. They're available through some of the commercial partners as well, like Family Past and Ancestry. You can find particulars there. And there are other types of employment records you might find if you have got ancestors who've moved from Ireland to the UK. Some of the records that we hold here for railway records, we have for some companies, we have quite extensive staff listing, and you might find that men have moved from working on ships, say, to railways, and we have records of those. We know we also have records of shipping moving around the country, and quite often there's a considerable wealth of Irish crew, so you might well be able to trace Irish ancestors through some of those records, particularly in the 19th century. And then there's a variety of other sources. Are there similar types of sources surviving for Ireland?
Well, there are equivalent records available in Ireland. There are railway records available, business records available, but none are really available online. So you'd have to make contact with the archive itself, or if there was an individual archive for one of the businesses, or else investigate in the National Archives or Public Record Office of Northern Ireland or places like that.
And presumably some of the county archives as well may hold locally specific records as well.
They certainly indeed. Local archives, county libraries often have those type of records available as well.
And I quite often find when you're researching in a very specific place, that local knowledge is such a key resource to finding what does survive in the records and being able to make contact with people in those communities can be an absolute game changer in terms of your research.
There's no substitute for local knowledge, and when I'm working with material, I often have to make contact with the local archives or with local history societies to see if I can find out some information which might get me around a roadblock that I'm stuck with. So there's no substitute for local knowledge and making contact with local societies, local archives, local libraries. It's always a very useful path to pursue.
So what would your top tips be for someone who is just beginning their research into their Irish ancestors, who has just recently discovered that they have Irish heritage themselves?
Well, I think the most important thing is not to give up, because there's often a perception around that almost all the Irish records were destroyed in 1922 in the Public Record Office disaster. An awful lot was destroyed, but an awful lot also survived. And a lot more has survived than we on our project would have thought initially at the start. But also, as the project continues, a lot more is turning up. So I'd encourage people to have a look at the population portal on virtualtreasury.ie, where census material and census substitute material is available, and hopefully more will become available over the coming years.
So it's a really exciting time to be researching in Irish social and cultural history through the virtual treasury.
Yes, I think it is.
Well, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you very much, Jessamy. I really enjoyed it.
Me too. Thank you. We hope this has been a useful introduction to researching your Irish heritage. Thank you and best of luck with your research.